They called it the workhorse of the Wehrmacht, the German Sd.Kfz 7 heavy half-track. This massive machine had towed 88mm flak guns across Europe and hauled supplies through Russian mud. By spring 1945, as American Gs captured these tractors and climbed into their driver's seats for the first time, they expected German engineering excellence, power, reliability, precision. What they discovered instead would reveal a fatal weakness that had helped doom the Third Reich, a weakness that had nothing to do with tactics, training, or even industrial capacity. Sometimes the most revealing truths about an enemy's collapse are found not in grand strategy, but in something as mundane as how many miles a truck gets per gallon. To understand what the Americans discovered, you first need to know about their own vehicle, the M3 half-track. Produced by the tens of thousands, the M3 was powered by a white 1.6ix engine, a 6-cylinder gasoline engine, producing 148 horsepower. It wasn't particularly powerful, but it was reliable, simple to maintain, and could be mass-produced using components from American commercial truck manufacturers. The M3 could carry a driver and 12 soldiers, or tow light artillery. Its 60-gallon fuel tank gave it a range of approximately 220 miles on roads, roughly 3.7 miles per gallon off-road. That dropped to about 2 miles per gallon. American soldiers knew their half-tracks were thirsty machines, but they accepted this as the price of mechanized mobility. After all, every gallon of fuel had to be shipped across U-boat-infested Atlantic waters, offloaded at French ports, and trucked hundreds of miles to the front. The German Sd.Kfz 7 was a different beast entirely, designed to tow heavy artillery, particularly the famous 88mm flak gun and 150mm howitzers. It was built for raw pulling power. The Maybach engine produced similar horsepower to the American unit, about 140 horses, but it displaced significantly more, 6.2 liters compared to the American engine, and it consumed fuel at a rate that would shock American maintenance crews. German technical manuals listed fuel consumption at approximately 80 liters per 100 kilometers on flat roads. That works out to roughly 3 miles per gallon under ideal conditions. But cross-country through mud and snow, consumption could skyrocket to 160 liters per 100 kilometers, staggering 1.5 miles per gallon. The vehicle carried 215 liters of fuel, about 57 gallons. On paper, this gave it a range of 155 miles on roads. In practice, under combat conditions, it often needed refueling after less than 75 miles. These weren't figures that American intelligence had paid much attention to during the war. When you're fighting an enemy, you care about their tank's armor thickness and gun-penetrating power, not how many miles per gallon their trucks get. But in March 1945, as American forces prepared to cross the Rhine River, that was about to change. The 9th Army under Lieutenant General William Simpson had captured a nearly intact German motor pool that had been hastily abandoned. Among the vehicles were several Sd.Kfz 7 tractors, apparently abandoned due to lack of fuel, a common fate for German vehicles in the final months of the war. A young captain in an ordnance company made a decision that would prove illuminating. Rather than simply cataloguing these vehicles for intelligence purposes, he decided to put them to immediate use. His unit desperately needed heavy towing vehicles. Why not use them? Within hours, American drivers had figured out the controls and got the German half-tracks running. The immediate impression was positive. The big Maybach engine roared to life with authority. The tracks bit into muddy ground with impressive traction. When hitched to heavy artillery, the Sd.Kfz 7 pulled without strain. One sergeant wrote home that the German half-track felt like driving a locomotive, powerful and steady, but somehow heavier and more ponderous than American vehicles. For the first day or two, everyone was impressed. Here was German engineering at its finest. Several officers began writing reports suggesting the army might want to adopt some of these design features. But then the fuel consumption figures started coming in, and the picture changed dramatically. Each captured Sd.Kfz 7 had been issued a full tank of American gasoline, 57 gallons, roughly the same as an M3, The American drivers knew their own M3 South could go 200 miles or more on a full tank, even when towing artillery, so they were shocked when, after less than 90 miles of mixed road and cross-country travel, the German half-tracks were running on fumes. At first, they assumed there was a mistake, perhaps a fuel leak. Perhaps the tanks hadn't been full. Perhaps they'd been driving inefficiently. But as more days passed, the pattern became undeniable. The German half-tracks were consuming fuel at nearly double the rate of American M3s. The ordnance captain ordered a systematic test. They selected one Sd.Kfz 7 and one M3, both in good mechanical condition. They filled both tanks to maximum, measured carefully, and planned an identical route. 25 miles of paved road, 15 miles of cross-country terrain, then 25 miles back on pavement. Each would tow a 150mm howitzer. The results were startling. The M3 completed the 65-mile circuit and still had fuel remaining. It had consumed approximately 17 gallons, achieving roughly 3.8 miles per gallon. The Sd.Kfz 7, running the identical course, consumed every drop of its 57-gallon tank and needed an emergency refill to make it back. It had burned approximately 63 gallons for the same 65 miles. That worked out to barely 1 mile per gallon. Someone did the arithmetic and realized the implications. To move a battalion's artillery 100 miles with M3 half-tracks would burn roughly 2,600 gallons. Do the same job with Sd.Kfz 7 South, and you'd burn approximately 6,300 gallons, more than twice as much. Scale that up to division level, corps level, or army level, and you're talking about tens of thousands of extra gallons per day. The American officers began to understand something crucial. The German military had designed its vehicles assuming fuel would always be available. Germany had synthetic fuel plants, captured oil fields in Romania, and expected rapid victories that would bring them to the oil fields of the Caucasus. They hadn't designed for fuel efficiency as a priority. American military planners, by contrast, had always operated under the assumption that every gallon was precious. All had to be shipped across submarine-infested oceans, transported hundreds of miles from ports to frontline units. American industry had developed engines that squeezed every possible mile out of every gallon, not because American engineers were necessarily more clever, but because American logistics demanded it. The Germans had built for power and performance. The Americans had built for efficiency and sustainability. As more German vehicles fell into American hands, this pattern repeated itself. German trucks consistently consumed more fuel than their American counterparts. Panther and Tiger tanks were notorious fuel hogs, managing less than 1 mile per gallon even on roads. The German Air Force flew aircraft that burned through fuel at prodigious rates. A picture emerged. The German military was exquisitely designed for short, violent campaigns where fuel could be captured or stockpiled in advance. It was terribly suited for long wars of attrition where every gallon mattered. This hadn't been apparent in 1939 and 1940, when German forces overran Poland and France in weeks, but by 1943 and 1944, with Germany fighting on multiple fronts and Allied bombing campaigns targeting synthetic fuel plants, the fuel hunger of German vehicles had become a critical vulnerability. Consider the practical implications. An American mechanized infantry company with 12 M3 half-tracks could operate for a full day of combat operations, moving 20 to 30 miles with approximately 200 gallons of fuel. The same company equipped with Sd.Kfz 7 South would need closer to 500 gallons. An American division required approximately 50,000 gallons of fuel per day. A German Panzer division with its less fuel-efficient vehicles required closer to 75,000 gallons per day. When Germany was winning and capturing enemy fuel stocks, this was manageable. When Germany was retreating and Allied bombers were hitting fuel production facilities, it became impossible. One particularly revealing incident occurred in early April 1945. Supply column with both American M3 South and captured Sd.Kfz 7 South was tasked with bringing supplies to a forward position, approximately 80 miles away. The American half-tracks completed the round trip without refueling and returned with fuel to spare. The German half-tracks, running the exact same route under identical conditions, had to be refueled at the midpoint. Without that emergency refueling, they would have been stranded. The convoy commander included this in his after-action report with a note: German vehicles unsuitable for sustained operations due to excessive fuel consumption. This wasn't isolated. Across Germany in spring 1945, similar stories played out wherever American units tried to employ captured German vehicles. German fuel production had peaked in early 1944 at approximately 5.7 million tons per year. By spring 1945, it had collapsed to less than 1 million tons, a drop of more than 80%. Allied bombing of synthetic fuel plants and the loss of Romanian oil fields to Soviet advances had devastated German fuel supply. The German military tried to compensate through strict rationing. Training flights were cancelled. Tank units were ordered to minimize movement. Horse-drawn wagons made a comeback as units tried to conserve fuel for combat vehicles. But rationing couldn't overcome the fundamental problem that German vehicles needed too much fuel. Even with strict rationing, German panzer divisions were frequently immobilized. They couldn't maneuver to respond to Allied attacks, couldn't retreat to better positions, couldn't advance to exploit opportunities. They simply sat in place waiting for fuel that never came, until Allied forces overran them. American soldiers driving captured Sd.Kfz 7 South found themselves stopping for fuel twice as often as in their own vehicles. They watched fuel gauges drop with alarming speed. They understood in a visceral way why so many German vehicles had been abandoned on roadsides with empty tanks. The Germans hadn't abandoned those vehicles because they were mechanically unreliable. They'd abandoned them because they'd literally run out of gas. The irony wasn't lost on American soldiers. Here they were, operating in the heart of Germany with fuel shipped from Texas and Oklahoma, keeping German-designed vehicles running. The Germans, fighting on their own soil, couldn't keep their own vehicles fueled. What did that say about the sustainability of the German war machine? This is the hidden story of how World War II was won, not just through superior tactics or industrial might, but through something as prosaic as fuel efficiency. The Germans had built magnificent machines optimized for short, decisive campaigns. The Americans had built practical machines optimized for the long haul. When the war became a marathon rather than a sprint, those extra miles per gallon made all the difference. Sometimes wars are won not by the army with the most powerful weapons, but by the army that can keep those weapons running.